The old red-brick courthouse in Millbrook, Ohio, had never felt this crowded. Rows of worn wooden benches were filled with townspeople, reporters with notepads poised, and curious onlookers craning their necks for a better view. The hum of whispered speculation floated in the air like an unsettled breeze. The trial of Daniel Hargrove, a local contractor accused of orchestrating a string of high-value thefts, had already gripped the town for weeks. Every day seemed to deliver some new twist. But on this chilly Tuesday morning, there was an unusual addition to the proceedings that made people glance twice. It wasn't the high-profile lawyers, nor the stern judge with his rimless glasses. Perched at the tip of his nose, it was the dog. A massive German shepherd, his coat a perfect blend of sable and black, sat upright beside the witness stand. His ears were pricked, his amber eyes alert, but he was still, the kind of stillness that radiates discipline. Around his neck was a black leather collar embossed with the gold insignia of the Millbrook Police K-9 unit. His handler, Officer Mark Benson, sat rigid beside him, a leash coiled tightly in his gloved hand. The dog's name was Rex, and everyone in town knew he was one of the department's finest, a trained tracker, drug sniffer, and protector who had been credited with multiple arrests over his 5-year career. But no one had ever seen him sitting in a courtroom like this, silent and imposing, as if he too were there to testify. At the back of the room, half hidden behind the taller frame of her mother, sat a girl who seemed out of place in the tense legal setting. 7-year-old Emily Carter clutched a small cloth rabbit with frayed ears, her feet not quite reaching the floor. She had been quiet since entering, her big hazel eyes darting around the room, but always returning to Rex. The girl's mother, Claire, kept an arm around her shoulders, occasionally leaning down to whisper words Emily barely seemed to hear. The judge called for order, his gavel striking once, sharp and clean. "Proceed," he instructed. The prosecution began their questioning of a witness, but Emily wasn't listening. Her gaze remained fixed on Rex. She knew that dog. She couldn't place where, but something deep inside told her she had seen him before, not in a passing glance, but in a way that mattered. She studied every inch of him, the set of his jaw, the shape of his ears, even the faint scar above his left eye. It stirred something in her memory, something she couldn't quite name. From where he sat, Rex occasionally turned his head in her direction. His eyes locked on her more than once, not with casual curiosity, but with a sharp focus of recognition. The handler noticed. Officer Benson's brow furrowed, and he glanced between the girl and his dog. But Rex remained in his seat, disciplined, a living statue of trained control. The rest of the courtroom was oblivious to the quiet tension building between the child and the K-9. Lawyers argued in measured tones. The stenographer typed furiously. The judge listened without expression. But for Emily, the world had narrowed to just one thing, Rex. She leaned closer to her mother and whispered, "That's him." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily hesitated. The truth sounded strange even to her own ears. "I've seen him before." Her mother's eyes flicked toward the dog, then back to Emily. "Honey, he's a police dog. You probably saw him on TV or in the parade last year." Emily shook her head with the stubborn certainty only a child could have. No, it was different. She, her mother warned as the judge glanced in their direction. Emily went quiet, but her mind didn't. She searched harder through her memories, trying to place the image that kept flashing in her thoughts. Rex, but not in a courtroom, not wearing that collar. Something about the memory made her chest feel tight. Meanwhile, Rex's ears twitched again at the sound of her voice. His tail gave the faintest of thumps against the floor, once, then twice, before the handler gave a subtle tug on the leash. The exchange was so slight that only the girl noticed it. The day's proceedings moved on, but Emily felt the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. She didn't know why she was here. Her mother had only told her it was to answer some questions, but she knew, with a certainty that made her palms sweat, that Rex was part of it. From the jury's bench, a man in a gray suit leaned toward his neighbor and muttered, "What's the dog for?" "Probably evidence," the other replied, half joking. But to Emily, Rex wasn't evidence. He was a puzzle piece she didn't know she was missing until now. And she wasn't sure what would happen if she found where he fit. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the sound almost too loud in the hush. A witness stepped down. Another was called up. The trial marched forward. But in the back row, a girl and a dog exchanged silent glances that neither could fully explain. Glances that would soon change the course of the entire case. The moment was approaching. Emily could feel it. The longer Emily sat in that hard wooden bench, the heavier the silence around her seemed to grow. She could hear the shuffle of papers from the prosecution table, the faint squeak of a chair as one of the jurors shifted, even the rhythmic tap-tap of the stenographer's keys. But all of it faded against the steady sound of her own breathing and the steady gaze she kept locked on Rex. The dog hadn't moved much since the trial began, but Emily noticed the small things. The way his ears twitched when certain voices rose, the way his nostrils flared faintly as if testing the air. Every now and then, his amber eyes would sweep across the room, and without fail, they would find her. She felt the connection again, that odd sense of familiarity she couldn't explain. It wasn't the kind of, "I saw him in the parade," recognition her mother had suggested. This was deeper. She remembered the way his fur had felt under her hand before. She remembered the sound of his bark. She even remembered the way he had tilted his head when she spoke to him, a curious, almost human gesture. But when she tried to think back, summer, that felt right. The air had been warm, the grass green. She had been sitting on the front steps, eating a peanut butter sandwich, when she'd seen a dog trotting down the street. Not just any dog, this dog. She had run to the gate, and he had stopped in front of her, tail wagging. He wore a collar. Then, but not the kind he had now. And there had been a man. She tried to picture the man's face, but in her memory, it was always half in shadow. "Emily," her mother's voice whispered beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. "Stop staring. It's rude." Emily looked up at her mother, but the words that wanted to come out felt too strange to say out loud. How could she explain that she thought the police dog in the middle of this serious trial had once stood in front of her house with a man she didn't know? So she just said, "I can't help it." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "We're here to answer some questions and then go home. Don't get distracted." But how could she not be distracted? Every time she blinked, the memory felt sharper, like a picture slowly coming into focus. She could almost hear the jingling of the dog's old collar. Across the room, Rex shifted slightly, his claws clicking softly against the floor. His gaze never left her. His handler, Officer Benson, leaned down and murmured something to him under his breath. But Rex didn't respond the way she expected. Instead of looking up at his handler, he kept watching her. Emily sat a little straighter. He remembers me too, she thought. The defense attorney droned on, flipping through a stack of papers as the next witness took the stand. People's attention turned forward again, but Emily stayed locked in that quiet current between her and the dog. She was about to whisper something else to her mother when she felt it, that odd flutter in her stomach again. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. A certainty blooming inside her like a secret only she knew. She thought of the man again. Tall, wore a jacket with a tear in the sleeve. She remembered the way his hand had rested lightly on Rex's back, almost possessive. She remembered the way he had glanced over his shoulder before speaking to her. His voice had been low, almost friendly, when he'd said, "Don't tell your mom, okay?" Her small hands curled into fists on her lap. She leaned toward her mother again, but this time she spoke with quiet insistence. "Mom, I have seen him before." The dog. It was with someone else. Her mother sighed. "Emily." "No, I mean it." Her voice was firmer now. "I gave him a biscuit. He was really nice. But the man," she stopped herself. The man's face had never been clear in her memory, but now she was beginning to realize something unsettling. The shape of the man's shoulders. The way he stood matched someone she could see in this very room. At the defense table. Emily's chest tightened. She didn't know why her brain had taken so long to connect the dots, but now that it had, she couldn't look away. The man in the gray suit, Daniel Hargrove, was watching the current witness with an expression of forced calm, but something about him set her teeth on edge. She glanced back at Rex. The dog's head tilted, just slightly, and his gaze followed hers to the defendant. Her heart thudded. He knows too. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt warmer, heavier. Emily wanted to speak, to say what she knew, but her mother's warning hand squeezed her shoulder. "Not now," she murmured. Emily slouched back in her seat, but her mind was anything but passive. She replayed the summer day in her head, the sound of the dog's breathing, the man's shadow over the sidewalk, the way her mother had called her inside moments later. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a random visit from a friendly stray and his owner. But if Rex was a police dog now, and that man at the defense table was on trial for stealing things, what did that mean? She was about to sink deeper into her thoughts when the judge unexpectedly called a recess. The shuffle of feet and scrape of chairs filled the room as people began moving around. The judge left through the side door. Lawyers gathered in whispered conversation, and the jury was escorted out. Emily barely noticed any of it, because Officer Benson was leading Rex toward the aisle, and toward her. She froze. Her mother looked surprised too. "Why is he?" she began, but stopped when Benson gave a polite nod in their direction. "The judge thought your daughter might want to meet Rex before she testifies," he said, his voice neutral. Emily's heart hammered. She didn't just want to meet him. She needed to. As Rex drew closer, his tail gave a slow wag. His eyes, bright and fixed on hers, seemed to say, "I know you." And in that moment, Emily knew she was about to do something that would change the course of the entire trial. The chatter in the courtroom quieted as Officer Benson led Rex down the aisle toward Emily. The dog's paws landed in a steady, deliberate rhythm on the polished floor, his nails clicking softly with each step. His head was high, ears perked forward, but his eyes never strayed from the small girl sitting in the back row. Emily clutched her cloth rabbit tighter. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. The sight of Rex coming closer made her feel both nervous and safe. There was something about the way he moved, as if he already knew her, as if he'd been looking for her in the crowd all morning. Her mother, Claire, glanced uneasily at the officer. "Is this really necessary?" she asked in a low voice. Benson gave a polite smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "The judge thought it might help your daughter relax before she testifies. Rex is gentle." Emily's gaze darted to her mother, silently pleading. Claire hesitated, then sighed, and nodded. "All right, just for a moment." Benson stopped a few feet away. "Emily, this is Rex. He's one of our best officers. Would you like to say hello?" Emily slid forward on the bench, her small shoes dangling before they touched the floor. Slowly, she stood, letting her rabbit dangle from one hand. She could feel everyone's attention shifting toward her. Jurors lingering in their seats, reporters leaning forward. Even the defendant, Daniel Hargrove, had turned slightly in his chair to watch. Emily stepped into the aisle. Rex's tail gave a slow, deliberate wag. The dog was bigger up close, his broad shoulders nearly level with her chest. She could see the faint scar above his left eye, just as she remembered. Her throat felt tight, but she managed a small smile. "Hi," she said softly. Benson loosened the leash just enough for Rex to take a step forward. The dog lowered his head, sniffing her hand. His breath was warm against her skin. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let her fingers brush against his fur. Then she crouched slightly, so her eyes were level with his, and whispered two words that seemed to carry more weight than anyone realized. "Good boy." The reaction was instant. Rex's ears shot forward. His tail began wagging faster, thumping against the floor in loud, steady beats. He gave a single sharp bark, startling a few people nearby. Benson's eyes widened, his hand tightening on the leash. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Emily smiled wider. "You remember me, don't you?" Another bark. This one was softer, almost playful. "Emily," her mother said quickly, glancing at the judge's empty bench. "Don't get him worked up." But Emily wasn't listening. Her attention was locked on Rex, who had stepped closer, pressing his head gently against her chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck without hesitation. It was an embrace of familiarity, not fear, the kind of hug you give a friend you haven't seen in a long time. Benson cleared his throat. "That's unusual," he muttered, almost to himself. "What is?" Claire asked, frowning. "He doesn't usually react like this to strangers." Emily looked up at him. "I'm not a stranger." Benson's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We've met before," Emily said simply. She glanced down at Rex and patted his side. "It was in the summer. He came to my house with a man. I gave him a biscuit." Claire's head whipped toward her daughter. "Emily." But Benson's attention sharpened instantly. "A man?" Emily nodded. "Tall, kind of messy hair. Had a jacket with a hole in the sleeve. He had Rex on a leash, but it wasn't. This leash, it was red." The words seemed to hang in the air. Benson straightened, exchanging a quick look with another officer across the room. Claire knelt beside her daughter. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" Emily's voice was calm, certain. "Yes, I remember because he told me not to tell my mom." Claire's face paled. Benson's grip on Rex's leash tightened again, though. The dog remained pressed against Emily's side, content and unbothered. From the defense table, Hargrove's eyes were fixed on them now, his expression unreadable. Benson cleared his throat again. "Emily, can you tell me anything else about that day?" She thought for a moment. "It was sunny. I was eating lunch outside. The man kept looking around, like he didn't want anyone to see him. And Rex didn't have this collar. It was plain, no badge." More glances were exchanged between officers. Benson's jaw tightened. "All right, thank you, Emily. That's very helpful." Claire stood, placing a protective arm around her daughter. "I think that's enough for now." Benson gave a slow nod and led Rex back toward the front of the courtroom, but the dog kept looking over his shoulder at Emily until they reached the witness stand again. The air felt different now, heavier, charged. Emily could sense it. In the way people were watching her, the way some whispered while others pretended not to. She didn't understand exactly what she had done, but she knew it mattered. She climbed back onto the bench beside her mother, who leaned in close. "Emily," she whispered, "you need to tell the truth about everything you remember when it's your turn." Emily nodded, eyes still following Rex. A moment lingered in her mind, the way his body had leaned into hers, the way his eyes had lit up when she spoke. It wasn't just that she remembered him. He remembered her too. Somehow, that meant something important. And as she glanced toward the defense table again, she noticed something else. Daniel Hargrove wasn't looking at the witness anymore. He was looking at her, not with curiosity, with fear. For a few seconds after Emily sat down, the entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath. The sound of Rex's tail hitting the floor still echoed in people's minds, as did the way the little girl had hugged him like an old friend. Most in the room assumed it was just a sweet, innocent moment between a child and a dog. But for Officer Benson, it wasn't that simple. He'd handled Rex for nearly 4 years, through high-pressure raids, long patrols, and tense standoffs. The K9 was disciplined to the bone. Rex didn't get excited about strangers, and yet he had reacted to Emily as though he'd known her for years. Benson stood beside the witness stand, glancing back at the girl. Her small frame looked almost swallowed by the oversized wooden bench. But her eyes, those sharp hazel eyes, never strayed far from Rex. The murmurs in the room were broken by the return of the judge, who entered from his chambers and reclaimed his seat. "Let's proceed," he said, his tone even. Before anyone could call the next witness, the prosecutor, Mr. Halpern, rose from his seat. "Your Honor, before we move forward, I'd like to address something that just occurred." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Go ahead." Halpern gestured toward Emily. The young witness's reaction to the K9, and vice versa, was unusual. I believe it may be relevant to the case. The defense attorney was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. A child petting a police dog has no bearing." "With respect, Counselor," Halpern cut in smoothly, this child just stated, in the presence of officers, that she had met this K9 before, in the company of a man who matches the defendant's description. A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is this true?" Benson cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor. The child claims she saw Rex in her neighborhood last summer, under the control of a man with a torn-sleeve jacket. She also identified that the collar was different at the time, not police-issued." The judge turned to the defense attorney. "Care to explain that?" The defense lawyer's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, my client denies ever having been in possession of this animal. The child is mistaken. Memories can be imaginative at her age." Emily sat straighter. "I'm not mistaken?" The room went quiet again. The judge looked at her directly. "Miss Carter, can you tell me exactly what you remember?" Emily swallowed, but her voice was steady. "It was a hot day. I was eating lunch outside, and I saw him," she pointed to Rex, "walking with a man. The man had messy hair and a rip in his jacket. He told me not to tell my mom I saw him. I gave Rex a biscuit. Then they walked away." Benson watched Rex during her words. The dog's ears tilted forward, as if listening to her, his eyes fixed on her face. A judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "And you're certain this is the same dog?" "Yes," Emily said without hesitation. "He has that little scar above his eye. And he remembers me." Almost as if on cue, Rex's tail gave a single slow wag. The defense attorney scoffed. "Your Honor, this is bordering on theatrics. Dogs wag their tails. It's hardly evidence." Halpern's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Unless the dog was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, in the company of someone he wasn't supposed to be with. Which raises serious questions about the timeline of this case." The judge's gaze sharpened. "Officer Benson, has Rex ever been missing from your unit?" Benson hesitated, his mind flicking to the one incident they'd been told not to speak of, the one swept under the rug to avoid public embarrassment. He glanced at the prosecutor, then back at the judge. "To my knowledge, sir, Rex has always been accounted for." Emily frowned. "That's not true." Her mother tried to hush her, but Emily's voice grew stronger. "If he was with that man in the summer, then he wasn't with the police, right?" The silence that followed was heavy. From the defense table, Hargrove's face had lost some of its composure. He shifted in his seat, fingers tapping restlessly against the wood. The judge broke the silence. "Mr. Halpern, I suggest you pursue this line of questioning." Gladwin nodded. "Gladly." He approached Emily with a careful smile. "Emily, would you be able to describe the man who was with Rex that day?" She looked past him, straight at the defendant. "It was him." Gasps erupted from the gallery. The defense attorney slammed a hand on the table. "Objection. Overruled," the judge said sharply. Emily's words seemed to hang in the air like a suspended note. All eyes turned to Hargrove, whose jaw clenched tighter with each passing second. Benson felt Rex's body shift beside him. The dog's muscles were taut, his eyes flicking between Emily and the defendant. The judge leaned forward. "Emily, I want you to think very carefully. Are you absolutely certain?" "Yes," she said again, her voice unwavering. "I'm sure." The defense attorney scrambled to recover, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A child's casual memory months after the fact is unreliable." But Halpern wasn't letting go. "Perhaps. But if this child is correct, it means the defendant had unauthorized possession of a police K-9 during the very period a series of thefts occurred. That is more than a casual memory. That is a direct link." The tension in the courtroom was now thick enough to feel. The judge tapped his gavel once. "We will take a short recess while counsel prepares to address this matter. Bailiff, see that the witness remains in the building." As the room stirred into motion, Benson bent to adjust Rex's collar. The dog's eyes never left Emily, and hers never left him. Somewhere deep inside, Benson knew whatever happened next, this little girl's quiet, certain voice had just cracked something wide open. And by the way the defendant was staring at the table, he knew it too. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was no longer simply tense. It was charged as if the air itself had thickened. Emily sat quietly beside her mother on the witness bench, her legs dangling above the floor, her little hands folded neatly in her lap. But her presence had the same effect as a stick of dynamite tucked into a pile of dry leaves. Everyone knew the explosion had already started. They were just waiting to see how far it would spread. Judge Whitmore's gavel came down once, and the murmuring died instantly. "We will now address the matter raised before recess," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man used to controlling storms. "Mr. Halpern, you may proceed." The prosecutor rose slowly, a folder in hand. "Thank you, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to request access to the K-9 unit's deployment and custody logs for the past 18 months. The defense attorney shot up. "Your Honor, I object. This case has nothing to do with the operational records of the police department." Halpern didn't miss a beat. "On the contrary, Counselor, the testimony we've just heard suggests that during the summer in question, this police dog, an active duty K-9, was in the custody of someone other than his assigned handler. If true, this would open up a potential chain of unauthorized activity directly tied to the defendant." The judge adjusted his glasses, considering the request. "Officer Benson, you're the K-9's handler. Do you have those records?" Benson's stomach nodded. He'd been dreading this. "Yes, sir. They're maintained at headquarters. But I'd like to point out—" "Officer," the judge cut in, "please answer directly. Would these records show if Rex was ever signed out or unaccounted for during the period in question?" Benson hesitated. "Yes, sir." A faint murmur passed through the gallery. The judge nodded. "Very well. This court will subpoena those records immediately." The defense attorney looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "Your Honor, objection overruled," the judge said, not waiting for him to finish. Halpern turned toward Emily again, his voice gentle. "Emily, you mentioned giving Rex a biscuit that day." Do you remember anything else about the man who was with him? The little girl's brow furrowed. He had a scratch on his cheek, and he had something in his pocket that kept jingling. The prosecutor leaned in slightly. Like keys? Emily shook her head. Not like keys. It sounded softer. Like coins, but a lot of them. Halpern paused, glancing at his notes. The thefts linked to Hargrove had all involved cash-heavy robberies, coin collections, laundromat drop boxes, vending machine safes. The detail was like a puzzle piece, snapping perfectly into place. Emily, he said carefully, do you remember what the man said to you? Her voice dropped slightly. He told me Rex was his dog now. He said they were going to be partners. The room seemed to collectively stiffen. From the defense table, Hargrove's hands curled into fists. His eyes were locked on the table in front of him, jaw muscles twitching with each passing second. The defense attorney finally moved. Your Honor, I have to reiterate, this is nothing more than a child's misinterpretation. The court cannot allow this kind of unsubstantiated storytelling to sway the jury. Judge Whitmore's voice was steady. And that is precisely why we will review the K-9 unit's logs. If the dog's whereabouts during the summer cannot be accounted for, we will have more than storytelling. We will have fact. Halpern gave a small nod. Your Honor, while we await those records, I'd like to call Officer Benson back to the stand for questioning. Benson's boots felt heavier than usual as he stepped up. He was sworn in again, then faced Halpern. Officer Benson, has Rex ever been in the presence of the defendant outside of official police business? Benson hesitated, then shook his head. Not to my knowledge. Has Rex ever been out of your custody without proper documentation? Benson's mouth went dry. Not officially. Halpern's eyes narrowed. Not officially? Benson exhaled slowly. There was one incident last year. Rex went missing for just under 24 hours. We were told to report it as a training exercise gone long. The gallery erupted in murmurs again. Halpern's tone sharpened. Who told you to report it that way? Benson's gaze flicked toward the rear of the courtroom, where a cluster of uniformed officers sat watching. My superior officer. He said the matter had been handled. And was it? Benson hesitated again. At the time, I thought so. Rex was returned unharmed. But now, his eyes shifted toward Emily. I'm not so sure. The prosecutor let the words hang for a moment, then stepped back. No further questions at this time. The defense attorney made a brief show of cross-examining, but his questions were clipped, defensive. He focused on Rex's reliability as a K-9, steering away from the missing day incident entirely. By the time Benson stepped down, the courtroom's energy had shifted again. The idea that Rex had been in unauthorized hands, possibly Hargrove's, was no longer speculation. It was a shadow hanging over the entire case. The judge finally called for another short break, instructing both parties to prepare for the introduction of the K-9 logs. As people stood and stretched, Halpern leaned toward his assistant, his voice low but urgent. If those logs confirm a gap, we have him. The girl is the key. Across the room, Hargrove sat perfectly still, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer defiant. They were calculating. And Benson, watching him from near the door, had the unsettling feeling that the man wasn't just reacting to the trial. He was planning something. The courtroom was quieter than it had been all morning, almost eerily so. People seemed to sense that the next few minutes could shift everything, and the air hummed with anticipation. Emily sat beside her mother, her hands folded tightly in her lap, though she could barely sit still. Something told her that today, her memory of Rex might finally matter more than anyone had imagined. The bailiff approached the judge with a thick manila folder, the K-9 unit's deployment logs. Your Honor, the requested documents. He sighed. Judge Whitmore nodded, gesturing for the prosecutor to retrieve it. Halpern rose, his pulse quickening despite the calm exterior. The folder felt heavier than its weight in paper. Inside were the detailed records of Rex's movements over the past 2 years. For Emily, it was almost like holding a book of secrets. The judge gave a small nod to Benson. "Officer, you may verify these records as they are introduced." Benson stepped forward, eyes scanning the logs. He didn't have to read far. A chill ran down his spine. The logs clearly showed a gap in Rex's custody. For nearly 24 hours in mid-July, there was no official documentation placing the dog under the department's care. The entries before and after were meticulous. Every patrol, every training session recorded with timestamps. But that single day was blank. Benson swallowed hard. This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. Halpern looked up at the judge. "Your Honor, the records confirm what the young witness testified. Rex was unaccounted for during the period she described. The same day, she claims to have encountered him with the defendant." The courtroom reacted immediately. Gasps, whispered conversations, a few reporters furiously scribbling notes. Even some of the officers in the back exchanged uneasy glances. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Officer Benson, can you confirm that during this unrecorded time, Rex was not assigned to any other official task?" "Yes, Your Honor," Benson said, voice strained. "To the best of my knowledge, Rex was missing from the unit during that period." Halpern stepped closer to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the testimony of a child who claimed to see the K9 in the presence of the defendant. Now you have official records confirming that Rex was indeed missing from police custody at that exact time." The murmuring grew louder. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably, his posture stiff. His hands gripped the edge of the table, as though he could somehow push the mounting evidence away. Halpern's voice was calm, but edged with authority. "This means that a trained police K9, one that was officially in the care of Officer Benson, was out of the department's custody and was possibly in unauthorized hands. According to Emily, those hands belonged to the defendant." The judge's gaze swept across the courtroom. "Officer Benson, was there any record of Rex being loaned out or reassigned?" Benson shook his head. "No, Your Honor, there is no official record. It was never reported accurately. We were told to document it as a training exercise, but that wasn't true." Halpern pointed to Emily. "And this child's memory aligns exactly with the missing period." The gallery erupted with whispers and shifting chairs. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens flying across notepads. From the defense table, the attorney rose, trying to maintain composure. "Your Honor, I object. The child's recollection is highly questionable. Memories of a 7-year-old are unreliable, especially months after the fact." The judge's response was sharp. Objection overruled. "The evidence speaks for itself." Emily's chest tightened. She hadn't meant for any of this to be dramatic. She had just remembered the summer day, the way Rex had looked at her, the feel of his fur under her hands. And now, everyone in the courtroom knew that what she remembered was real. Rex shifted slightly beside Benson, tail brushing the floor with deliberate strength. It was almost as if he knew the tension in the room, knew that his absence had just become a central fact in the case. Benson's gaze flicked to the dog. He reacted that way because he remembered her," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Halpern nodded. "Your Honor, I would like to request that Emily be allowed to testify about the details of that day. Her statements regarding Rex and the defendant are corroborated by these records." The judge considered, tapping his gavel lightly on the bench. "Very well. The court will hear the child's testimony." Emily stood, hands slightly trembling, and walked back to the front with her mother at her side. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. The press cameras focused, the jurors leaned forward, and even Hargrove's expression betrayed the first. Signs of unease. Halpern knelt slightly to be at Emily's level. "Emily, can you tell the court exactly what you saw that day?" She nodded. It was sunny. "I was eating lunch outside when Rex came walking with a man. He wasn't wearing his police collar. It was red. The man had messy hair, a tear in his jacket, and jingling coins in his pocket. He told me not to tell my mom. I gave Rex a biscuit, and he remembered me." A hush fell over the courtroom. The weight of her words was undeniable now. Benson exhaled slowly. I've handled Rex for years," he said quietly, "and he doesn't just react like this to strangers. That dog knows her, and that man should never have been with Rex." The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. The dog cannot testify. The child cannot be considered credible evidence." Judge Whitmore raised a hand. "We are not judging the child's credibility in isolation. We have verified records showing that Rex was unaccounted for. The question now is, where was he, and with whom?" Emily glanced at Rex. The dog gave a small, encouraging huff, as if saying, "Tell them everything." And at that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room. The story that began as a simple memory of a summer afternoon had now become the key to unraveling the defendant's alibi. Hargrove's hands tightened around the edge of the table, and his eyes darted nervously between Emily, Rex, and Officer Benson. The confident mask he had worn since the trial began was cracking. The judge leaned back, looking over his glasses. "The court will reconvene tomorrow morning to continue testimony. Officer Benson, ensure Rex remains present." As the courtroom began to empty, whispers filled the air. Emily's mother held her hand, smiling faintly but clearly proud. Emily felt a mixture of relief and excitement. She hadn't meant for this to happen, but somehow her memory and her bond with Rex had shifted the entire case. Benson knelt to Rex, brushing a hand over his ears. "Good boy," he murmured. But even he knew this wasn't just a compliment anymore. This dog had just become the centerpiece of a revelation that no one in Millbrook would ever forget. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a tense energy that felt heavier than the previous day. News of the K-9 logs and Emily's testimony had spread quickly, and journalists, jurors, and spectators alike were on edge. Every whispered conversation seemed to carry speculation about what the child's memory could mean for the defendant, Daniel Hargrove. Emily sat quietly with her mother, clutching her rabbit tightly. She didn't understand all the details adults were discussing, but she knew this. She had told the truth about Rex, and somehow that truth had shaken everything. Officer Benson stood near Rex, who was calm but alert, tail flicking and small. Deliberate movements. He could feel the tension radiating from the defendant at the defense table, the way Hargrove's eyes flickered toward Rex, and then quickly away as if afraid of acknowledgement. Judge Whitmore called the court to order. "We will continue with testimony regarding the K-9 and the events surrounding his absence. Mr. Halpern, please proceed." Halpern walked toward the witness area, nodding at Emily encouragingly. "Emily, the court appreciates your previous testimony. Now, can you tell us more about what happened that day with Rex and the man?" Emily's small voice filled the room. He said he was taking Rex somewhere special. And I remember thinking that Rex looked happy, but the man looked nervous. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he didn't want anyone to see him. Benson noticed Rex's ears tilt sharply, almost in response to her words. The dog's gaze swept across the courtroom, eventually settling on the man in the gray suit at the defense table. Halpern probed gently. "Did the man say anything else?" Emily nodded. "He told me that Rex and he were going to be partners. He said we had to keep it a secret." A hush fell over the room. Even the reporters, who were used to dramatic testimony, leaned forward. Halpern addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the young witness has identified a timeline. During this period, Rex was under unauthorized supervision. Her memory correlates with official records confirming that the K9 was unaccounted for. From the defense table, Hargrove's fingers tapped rapidly on the surface. The confident posture he had maintained was dissolving, replaced by a tense, almost predatory alertness. The judge turned to Officer Benson. Would you explain the significance of Rex being unaccounted for? Benson nodded, choosing his words carefully. Rex is a highly trained police K9. He's used in search and rescue, narcotics detection, and tracking suspects. If he's out of official custody, that means someone unauthorized had access to a trained K9. That could be dangerous, especially if the person intends to commit a crime or hide evidence. Halpern's eyes narrowed. So if, as Emily testified, the defendant had Rex in his presence, that would mean he had unauthorized access to a police asset. During the same period, several thefts occurred in Millbrook. Emily's mother gasped softly, squeezing her daughter's hand. Emily looked up at Rex, who gave a low, almost approving huff. Halpern turned to Emily again. Emily, can you remember anything else about the man's appearance or actions? The girl took a small breath. He had a scratch on his cheek, and he jingled coins in his pocket, like he was counting them. I think he was hiding them from someone. The courtroom murmured. The detail wasn't trivial. It matched the evidence from the thefts. Stolen coins from laundromats and vending machines had been discovered, cash missing, and authorities had been searching for leads. The defense attorney jumped up. Objection. This is circumstantial and speculative. Judge Whitmore's gaze was firm. Overruled. Testimony is relevant to the events in question and corroborated by official records. Emily's small hands were trembling slightly, but she didn't waver. I remember Rex looking at me a lot, she added, like he wanted to tell me something. And I think he knew I was telling the truth about the man. Benson's jaw tightened. He had seen that look in Rex's eyes before. When the dog trusted someone implicitly, he would react in subtle ways, leaning closer, keeping his gaze, small gestures that others might not notice. And Emily had observed every one of those gestures. Halpern gestured toward the defense table. Your Honor, the child has identified the man, described him, and recalled specific details matching known events. Coupled with the K9 logs, this is a direct link between the defendant and the unauthorized possession of Rex. Hargrove's hands tightened into fists. He was no longer calm. His eyes darted between Emily, Rex, and Officer Benson. For the first time in the trial, the mask of confidence was cracking. The judge addressed the jury. Members of the jury, you have now heard testimony suggesting a connection between the defendant and the K9 during a period when the dog's whereabouts were unaccounted for. Consider the totality of the evidence carefully. Halpern nodded. Toward Emily. One more thing, Emily. Did the man say anything that might explain why Rex was with him? Emily's eyes widened as she remembered. He said we had to be partners. I think he meant for something bad. I mean, he wanted Rex to help him do something he shouldn't. But Rex didn't like it. The room went silent. Even the reporters seemed to hold their breath. Benson stepped forward. The dog's behavior confirms that. When Rex was reunited with Emily today, he recognized her immediately. He reacted strongly to the defendant. That's not random. A trained K9 doesn't act like that unless there's familiarity and prior association. The defense attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, the dog cannot speak. The child's memory is insufficient. Judge Whitmore's gavel came down firmly. Sustained, but the record will reflect Officer Benson's observation of the K9's reactions. which may be considered by the jury in context with the testimony and official records. Emily sat back slightly, but her eyes never left Rex. The dog's tail flicked once, almost as if acknowledging her courage. For the first time, the gallery noticed the subtle, yet undeniable tension radiating from Hargrove. His shoulders were tight, his knuckles white. He kept glancing at Rex, then at Emily, and back again. He seemed aware that the child's memory and the dog's reactions were cornering him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The prosecutor leaned in toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, consider this. A trained police dog was out of official custody. A man had access to him. A child observed this and remembers it clearly. The logs confirm the absence. Rex reacted to the child, but not to the man. That reaction alone is telling. Evidence, memory, and animal behavior all converge. This is why every detail she's provided is crucial." The judge called for a short recess, giving everyone a moment to absorb the gravity of the testimony. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread like wildfire. People were already speculating about the implications of the child's memory, the K9, logs, and the defendant's increasing discomfort. Emily's mother knelt beside her, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You did great, sweetheart. You remembered everything." Emily nodded. "I just told the truth, Mom. Rex remembers." 2. Benson crouched down, giving Rex a reassuring pat. The dog's calm demeanor masked the intensity of what had just occurred. In his trained mind, he had observed and remembered the man who had once taken him away. And now, with Emily's testimony, the hidden truth had begun to emerge. The judge called the court back to order, and everyone returned to their seats. The stage was set. Evidence, memory, and canine behavior were aligning against the defendant. For the first time, it felt as though the case could shift dramatically, all thanks to the keen observation of a little girl and the loyalty of a police dog. The courtroom was packed, tension thick enough to feel in the air. The previous day's testimony, coupled with Emily's recall and the K9 logs, had shaken the case to its core. Every spectator, juror, and officer present seemed aware that they were on the cusp of something monumental. Emily sat beside her mother, clutching her rabbit. She could hear the low murmur of voices around her, but remained focused on Rex, who sat calmly beside Officer Benson. His ears flicked occasionally, and his body tensed in ways only Benson could interpret. Subtle signs that the dog was aware something important was about to happen. Judge Whitmore called the court to order. "We will now hear the final evidence relating to the unauthorized possession of the K9 and the defendant's connection. Mr. Halpern, you may proceed." Halpern rose, walking slowly toward the jury. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Hargrove at the defense table. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've learned over the past several days has revealed a chain of events previously hidden. The defendant, Mr. Daniel Hargrove, had unauthorized access to Rex, a police K9, during a period when several thefts occurred across Millbrook. The K9 unit's official logs confirmed this gap." He paused, letting the significance settle over the courtroom. "And thanks to the testimony of a courageous young witness, Emily Carter, we know exactly when and where Rex was taken, and by whom." The gallery was silent, every eye now trained on Emily. Halpern knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Emily, can you tell the court what happened when you saw Rex with Mr. Hargrove that summer?" Emily took a deep breath. "It was sunny. He had Rex on a leash, but it wasn't the police one. He told me we had to keep it a secret. I gave Rex a biscuit. Rex remembered me. And I think he didn't like being with that man." Rex's tail thumped once, sharply, as if confirming her words. Officer Benson nodded, his face tight with seriousness. Halpern pointed toward Hargrove. "Emily, did the man say anything that made you worry?" He said he and Rex were going to be partners, she said. I think he meant he wanted Rex to help him take things that weren't his. A murmur spread across the courtroom. The jurors leaned forward, the gravity of her words sinking in. Benson stood, addressing the judge. Your Honor, I've handled Rex for years. He's a trained K-9. When he reacted to Emily today, it wasn't just recognition. He reacted to her and not to the defendant. That's a clear sign that Rex had prior interaction with the man in an unauthorized context. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking over the courtroom. Do the records confirm the timing of this interaction? Benson nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The K-9 unit logs indicate that Rex was unaccounted for during the time Emily described. It lines up perfectly. Halpern stepped closer to the jury. So we have 3 independent sources confirming the same events. A child's testimony, a police dog's reactions, and official records. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not coincidence. The defense attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, this is circumstantial. The dog cannot testify. Judge Whitmore raised his hand firmly. Sustained, but the record will reflect Officer Benson's observations. The jury may weigh this along with all other evidence. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted between Emily and Rex, a flicker of fear crossing his face. For the first time, his composure cracked entirely. Halpern pressed forward. Emily, did the man do anything with Rex that seemed wrong? Emily nodded, her small voice firm. He kept Rex away from the people who could stop him. And he jingled coins in his pocket. I think those were stolen. The gallery reacted. Even the jurors exchanged looks. Emily's words matched details of thefts that had puzzled investigators. For months, Benson spoke up. Rex's behavior confirms that he was uncomfortable with the man. A trained K-9 doesn't act like that unless he senses something wrong. His training and instincts are perfect indicators. Emily's observation of the dog aligns with reality. Halpern turned to the jury, voice resolute. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a child who witnessed the unauthorized possession, a dog who reacted to the truth, and official logs showing that K-9 was missing. Together, they reveal the defendant's actions beyond a reasonable doubt. At that moment, Rex shifted his weight and gave a single low huff. It was almost like a signal, drawing every eye in the courtroom. Hargrove flinched, his hands gripping the table. His breathing was faster now, shallow. He could no longer hide the truth. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hargrove, you understand the evidence against you. Do you have anything to say? Hargrove's voice was tight, strained. I didn't mean. Halpern cut in smoothly. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Unauthorized possession of a police K-9, coupled with a series of thefts during that period, confirmed by official logs, a trained officer's observations, and the testimony of a young witness. There is no ambiguity here. Emily's mother put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. You've done so well, Emily, she whispered. Emily looked down at Rex. The dog nuzzled her hand, as if sharing her pride and understanding her courage. Benson stepped closer. Your Honor, I have no doubt that Rex's reactions are consistent with the child's testimony. The K-9 recognized her as someone familiar and trusted, and he reacted negatively toward the unauthorized handler. That is critical confirmation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Every piece, Emily's memory, Rex's instinct, the missing logs, the matching details of thefts had aligned perfectly. Judge Whitmore exhaled slowly, glancing over his glasses at Hargrove. It appears, based on the evidence presented, and corroborated, that there is sufficient proof of unauthorized possession of a police K-9 and connection to the thefts committed during the period in question. The court will now take this into account in deliberations regarding the defendant's charges. Hargrove slumped in his chair. The confident, composed exterior he had maintained throughout the trial had crumbled entirely. He knew the child's words, the dog's behavior, and the official records had cornered him. The truth, undeniable, simple and shocking, had come to light. Emily hugged her rabbit, unaware of the enormity of what had just happened. She had simply remembered a summer afternoon and spoken honestly to a dog she trusted. And that honesty had exposed a crime that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. Rex rested his head on Benson's leg, but kept his gaze fixed on Emily, as if saying, "We did it together." The judge called the court adjourned for the day. Outside, reporters clamored to interview officers. Jurors whispered speculations and fined. The story of a little girl and a police dog exposing a hidden crime spread like wildfire. Emily walked out of the courtroom with her mother, hands intertwined, Rex following closely behind. She didn't fully understand the magnitude of her testimony, but she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had helped uncover the truth. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that courage, honesty, and a bond between a child and a dog could change the course of justice entirely. The case would go down in Millbrook history, not for the crime itself, but for how the smallest voice and the keen instincts of a loyal police dog exposed the shocking truth. Emily looked up at Rex and whispered, "We did it, buddy." Rex wagged his tail, a slow, deliberate sweep. And in that simple gesture, the courtroom saga that had started with two innocent words from a little girl reached its unforgettable conclusion.